Good morning, and welcome to another episode of Words of Life. We've talked about a lot of different things. Andrew typically doing these videos, but he's actually out of town, so we've talked about a lot of different things that Jesus has to say and how he offers a lot of spiritual counsel towards a lot of different people in a lot of different places in their lives. One of the things that you will notice about Jesus' teaching is he oftentimes speaks towards the rich. I think for us, a lot of us who are watching this video, we have at least the ability to watch videos and make videos. So we're actually pretty wealthy from the perspective of others in the world. And we sometimes take that for granted, and Jesus knew his audience enough to know that they took that for granted too. And a lot of the, sort of the concept that the Jews had in the first century was that if you are rich, then God has blessed you, and if you are poor, then God has cursed you. They had a very superficial and a very trivial view of things, almost like Job's friends many centuries prior. But one of the things that Jesus has to say towards the rich comes in Luke chapter 16. Luke chapter 16, verses 19 through 31, he actually tells this account of a rich man and Lazarus. And a lot of times people, when they're talking about this section from Luke's gospel, they sort of get wrapped up in developing a systematic understanding of what happens after we die, and they kind of miss the point. That's not to say that there's not anything of value here that we can use to help us understand what happens after we die, but the point is not really to talk about that. The point is to talk about the difficulty and the snare that riches can become. And again, not to label everybody who's wealthy as being hateful or apathetic towards the plight of others. That's certainly not true. We can think of plenty of examples of people with money who use their money well. But in the case of the rich man and Lazarus, this rich man did not. And so we look in Luke chapter 16 and verses 19 through 31. All of this is Jesus talking here. He says, "Now there was a rich man, and he habitually dressed in purple and fine linen, joyously living in splendor every day. And a poor man named Lazarus was laid at his gate, covered with sores, and longing to be fed with the crumbs which were falling from the rich man's table. Besides, even the dogs were coming and licking his sores. Now the poor man died and was carried away to the angels to Abraham's bosom. And the rich man also died and was buried. In Hades he lifted up his eyes, being in torment, and saw Abraham far away and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried out and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus so that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool off my tongue, for I am in agony in this flame. But Abraham said, Child, remember that during your life you received your good things. And likewise Lazarus had things, but now he is being comforted here, and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you there is a great chasm fixed, so that those who wish to come over from here to you will not be able, and that none may cross over from there to us. And he said, Then I beg you, Father, that you send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, in order that he may warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment. But Abraham said, They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. But he said, No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent. But he said to them, If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be persuaded, even if someone rises from the dead." Now, Jesus' whole point is to talk about the difficulty of riches. He's talked about this in other places too. There's a rich young ruler who comes to him, and Jesus tells him to sell all that he has and follow after him, and he's unwilling to do that, and he walks away. Jesus has compassion on that man, but then he kind of launches into a little bit of a sermon for his followers to talk about the difficulty of riches. When you have riches, there are more opportunities to use those riches for nefarious activities and to be apathetic towards the plight of others. And that certainly is the case for the rich man who walked past Lazarus each and every day. It's interesting that it almost seems very passively stated that Lazarus was laid at the gate. He was so pathetic and he was in such need. And he just laid there. And the dogs, coming and licking his sores. It's pretty awful. It's an awful existence. And then, interestingly enough, and how fitting, how we see a sort of poetic justice in the case of the rich man, who in torment asks that somebody would help him. You think about how often Lazarus cried out for somebody to help him too, cried out for the rich man to help him, and now the roles are completely reversed. We have the rich man who is begging for comfort and begging for help, just like Lazarus for so many years had begged for comfort and begged for help. Nobody even stopped the dogs from licking his sores. And so really the point here comes back to verse 14. The Pharisees, they were lovers of money, and they were listening to Jesus and scoffing at him and ridiculing him. And it is those same people that Jesus is addressing this to. A lot of times in life, we attribute success and we attribute value to purely how much money we have. And when we do that, we overlook the fact that God is a blesser of individuals, and that God does allow sometimes chance and time and calamity to fall. And sometimes He uses difficulty to come into our lives to make us stronger. We also need to be very, very careful about measuring our success as God's approval in our lives. Just because we're successful in a world that is corrupted in sin, that does not mean that God approves of all that we do. So we have to be careful that we don't fall into the trap of what the Pharisees in the early Jews and even Christians fell into, that Jesus is condemning here. We don't want to fall in the same trap as Job's friends who fell into that trap hundreds of years prior. We have to be very careful about how we measure success. And always we need to entrust our plans and our operations and our actions into God's hands. We must trust Him because we are merely stewards of what has been given to us. So whether we live a very poor life, whether we live a rich life, whether we live a middle class life, we can be blessed by God, and that is not contingent on our income. So words to think on today for the rich, as we've seen in Luke chapter 16, we referenced also Matthew 18, where Jesus deals with the rich young ruler. Those are really great places to be thinking about. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to go to heaven. And so if you do find yourself to be rich, use your riches well, be quick to share, and help those who are in need. And in your riches, you can be a blessing to those who are in difficulty. We love you, and we hope that these words of life from Jesus, our teacher, have been beneficial for you today.